Under a blazing late April sun, a fine veil of ochre dust swirls through the air above Ouagadougou's central plaza, carrying with it the distant rumble of pounding drums and murmured chants that rise and fall like restless waves against sand. Disguised in a simple faded cap and nondescript jacket, Captain Ibrahim Traoré steps out of an unmarked vehicle and blends into the milling crowd, his heartbeat sinking with the steady thrum of 1,000 eager voices. For a moment, he allows the sounds to wash over him, the earnest hum of anticipation, the sharp whisper of flags snapping in the breeze, the electric charge of unity coursing through bodies pressed shoulder to shoulder. He breathes deeply, filling his lungs with the mingled scent of sweat, dust, and the acrid tang of cheap gasoline from passing motorcycles. Every fiber of his being is on high alert. Can the people around him sense that the man they've come to honor stands directly among them, unnoticed? As he moves forward, Traoré's eyes scan massive portraits of himself that tower like silent sentinels above the crowd, each canvas face more stoic and larger than life than the last. The Burkinabè flag flutters beside stark red Russian banners in a bold declaration of newfound alliances, a visual manifesto of defiance against forces long deemed imperial. Placards rise and fall in tight, deliberate unison. Down with imperialism. Long live our sovereignty. Their slogans lighting up the plaza with the fervor of shared conviction. Yet beneath the orchestrated fervor lies the undercurrent of a story less visible. The abrupt midnight arrests of top army officers accused of plotting from across the border in Ivory Coast, the hushed interrogations in unlit cells, the soft but undeniable ache of betrayal that gnaws at the junta's own ranks. Traoré feels the weight of every gaze he avoids, every careful step he takes. In this sea of faces, students clutching hastily painted signs, farmers in traditional tunics, mothers holding wide-eyed children aloft, each person embodies a fragment of the nation's restless hope and simmering indignation. He recalls the announcement just days earlier, how the junta claimed to have foiled a major plot hatched by dissidents alleged to be hiding in Abidjan, a claim Ivory Coast adamantly denies. He remembers the flicker of disbelief and relief that crossed his own face when the intelligence reports landed on his desk, forged in secrecy under the pale lamplight of his inner sanctum. Now, standing here unseen, he wonders whether the fervent applause truly springs from gratitude or from the fear of standing against a force as unyielding as the Sahel sun. Every second he remains incognito elevates the stakes. How many among them have whispered doubts they dare not voice aloud? Who here has lost a brother, a father, or a friend to the slow churn of accusations and detentions that have reshaped the country's power structure since the coup of September 2022? The rally is more than a spectacle. It is a barometer of loyalty, a live test of the narrative he and his inner circle have spun, that their actions, however severe, are acts of liberation from the shadow of former colonial powers, that Burkina Faso must forge its destiny beyond the reach of France, shoulder to shoulder with new partners. As he inches closer to the epicenter of celebration, Traoré steels himself for the moment when he will step forward, shed his disguise, and address the very crowd whose hearts he has been quietly mapping. But first, he must absorb this electric tableau in silence, witness the unity, sense the tension, feel the collective pulse of a nation at the crossroads of revolution and ritual. Only then, when the time is right, will he reveal himself, not as the distant figure on giant banners, but as one among many, bound by shared purpose and brimming with the promise of a free, dignified, sovereign Africa. Since September 2022, the streets of Ouagadougou have carried a different rhythm, no longer merely the steady pace of market carts and buzzing scooters, but the tight drumbeat of military order edging into everyday life. After Captain Ibrahim Traoré's swift coup, the capital had become a stage for carefully choreographed displays of power. Market vendors traded in guarded glances, parents taught children whispers about checkpoints, and the constant whine of helicopter blades overhead wove a taut underscore through every conversation. Beyond Burkina Faso's borders, neighboring Sahel states teetered on similar precipices. Niger and Mali, each under military rule, were negotiating new alliances and old rivalries in the shifting sands of post-colonial influence. Russian envoys were no longer anonymous figures behind tinted windows, but welcomed guests, while the familiar French flags of past decades had been lowered, folded, and quietly set aside. In this brittle atmosphere, murmurs of resistance and rumors of betrayal found fertile ground, their echoes ricocheting through corridors of power and back-alley cafes alike. On the night of April 21st, an unannounced communiqué rippled through the junta's inner sanctum like a thunderclap. Under the muted glow of a single desk lamp, Traoré's intelligence chief slid a file across the polished mahogany table, a dossier stamped top secret and sealed with the junta's emblem. The pages, illuminated by lamplight, detailed telephone intercepts, coded letters traced to Abidjan, and surveillance photos of uniformed officers slipping across the border under cover of darkness. At precisely 2:17 a.m., after a hurried encryption of the final pages, the head of military intelligence transmitted the order: arrest all persons listed in Annex A. Within minutes, black uniformed commandos fanned out across Ouagadougou's barracks, encircling barracks and official residences. By dawn, half a dozen star-ranked officers, long-standing pillars of the previous regime, were found in custody, shackled and bewildered. News outlets controlled by the junta broke the story at sunrise. Major plot foiled, traitors netted, stability secured. The nation woke to headlines that mixed relief with foreboding, as images of handcuffed generals in stained fatigues flickered across state television. Those arrested were not obscure figures, but once trusted confidants. Colonel Yakuba Tiamoko, celebrated for quelling northern insurgencies. Brigadier General Amina Sanu, the first female deputy chief of staff. And Major Isufu Traoré, no relation to the captain, whose strategic brilliance had helped forge early peace accords. Now each name on the detention list carried a weight of disbelief and betrayal. Soldiers who once saluted their commanders with unflinching loyalty found themselves questioning every whispered order and clandestine meeting. Traoré, reading the dossier under the pallid lamplight, felt a cold knot tighten in his gut. Had he trusted too easily? Could innocence be ensnared by false intelligence? The line between patriot and conspirator seemed to blur, and every confidant's face flickered through his mind as a possible threat. In the hush of his private quarters, he closed his eyes and heard the echo of footsteps in an empty corridor, his own footsteps leading friends and comrades into detention cells. When dawn gilded the horizon, official spokespeople took to podiums. Across Ouagadougou, the Minister of Information, her voice firm and measured, declared, "This foiled plot was orchestrated from neighboring Ivory Coast, using funds and safe houses in Abidjan." Cut to a pre-recorded clip of Traoré himself. "We will not permit neo-colonial powers or their local lackeys to undermine our sovereignty." Behind him, giant screens displayed maps tracing alleged arms shipments from Ivorian ports northward, through Weimoa routes. Yet, in Abidjan, foreign ministry officials bristled at the accusations. "These claims are baseless," responded Côte d'Ivoire's spokesman in a televised address. "We categorically reject any suggestion of harboring dissidents." His words were accompanied by images of Ivorian border posts and assurances of cooperation. Regionally, the tension rippled outward. In Bamako, Mali's junta warned against political destabilization. In Niamey, Niger's council offered to mediate. Meanwhile, Western observers noted the broader pattern. Sahelian regimes stepping out of ECOWAS's umbrella and into a nascent alliance of Sahel states, bound by mutual defense pacts and shared anti-Western rhetoric. These military governments, once disparate, now spoke in unison against imperial greed, their declarations punctuated by Russian flags signifying arms deals and diplomatic backing. In this theater of shifting alliances, every podium statement and counterstatement became both weapon and shield. shaping public perception as rigorously as any midnight raid. By mid-morning on April 24th, the arteries leading into the city's center pulsed with human tide. From dusty side streets and tree-lined boulevards, streams of protesters merged, their numbers swelling into the tens of thousands. The distant rumble of engines gave way to a uniform chant. "Down with imperialism! Long live sovereignty!" Each voice carried the same cadence, rising in volume, until it felt as though the very earth beneath Ouagadougou's feet was shaking. Motorcycle convoys wove through gaps in the crowd, riders unfurling flags as their engines roared like mechanical thunder. Street vendors abandoned wares to join the tide. Shop shutters banged open as proprietors stepped onto sidewalks, fist raised in solidarity. Even the midday heat seemed to bend in deference, as bodies pressed together like honeycomb cells, each connected to the next in a mosaic of shared purpose. Above the kaleidoscope of faces, Burkinabè tricolors snapped in the breeze alongside bold Russian banners, deep crimson fields emblazoned with gold stars. The juxtaposition told a story of new allegiances replacing old loyalties. Towering canvases of Traoré's visage rose like silent guardians, his stare calm yet unyielding, eyes fixed beyond the immediate chaos. Beneath each portrait, placards proclaimed evergreen slogans. "Imperialism is dead. Our destiny, our hands." Shimmering in the sun, a sea of identical white t-shirts bore the junta's insignia and a single word: unity. As the crowd shifted, waves of fabric pulsed like living cells. Dust motes lifted into golden halos around marchers' heads, capturing the sunlight in an almost sacred glow. Here and there, elderly townsfolk in patterned bubu marched arm in arm, with students in hoodies, their contrasting attire collapsing boundaries of age and class. Even stray dogs padded along porous edges of the crowd, tongues lolling as if in celebration. In the front ranks, a university student named Salimata clutched a hand-painted placard high above her head. Her eyes glittered with the raw energy of youth, voice cracking as she chanted beneath the sweltering sun. Beside her, fellow undergraduates filmed every moment on their phones, live-streaming the event to social media channels that crackled with commentary from diaspora communities. A few paces back walked Marcel, a gray-haired former teacher turned civil society leader, his gait unsteady but determined. His hand trembled as he gripped a battered megaphone, yet when he spoke, "This is our moment," his voice rang clear, a resonant echo that threaded through the crowd like a clarion call. Nearby, a barefoot child spun a stubby placard like a makeshift toy, his laughter rising above the clamor and meeting the thunder of adult voices in a surreal harmony. At the edges, women balanced woven baskets of fruit on their heads, marching without breaking stride, as if the act of carrying their livelihoods on this single afternoon was itself a declaration of resilience. Just as the march crested the last ridge before the central square, a sharp, piercing cry cut through the unified din. A little boy, no more than 8 years old, pointing directly at Traoré's concealed figure. "Papa!" he yelled, voice laden with awe and confusion. A ripple passed through the surrounding marchers, heads turned, cameras swiveled, and for a heartbeat, the crowd's singular purpose fractured into a wave of recognition and astonishment. Traoré froze, heart pounding as anxious palms brushed the concealed pistol at his side. Would this accidental revelation spark euphoria or alarm? Before the moment could resolve, the boy's mother gently tugged him onward, drowning out the potential unmasking with renewed cheers. In that suspended instant, the question hung heavy in the air. Could the man at the center of this orchestrated show ever truly disappear in plain sight? As the marchers surged forward into the open plaza, the next act, Traoré's speeches and the voices of his government, waited just beyond the crowd's roaring crest. The avenues feeding into Ouagadougou's heart pulsed with life as they emptied into the central square, each street a human artery surging toward a single destination. From the north, farmers in dusty tunics trudged alongside traders who'd abandoned their carts. From the east, students in t-shirts bearing handwritten slogans wove through the crowd. From every direction, thousands converged until the plaza, felt less like an open space and more like the beating chest of a restless nation. Above it all, a distant drumbeat began to morph into a tribal throb, syncopating with the rhythmic stamping of feet on cracked pavement. Then, in unison, 100,000 voices rose as one. Down with imperialism and its local lackeys. The chant rolled over the crowd in waves, cresting and crashing in alternating tongues. French, Moray, Dioula, with the same defiant meaning. Motorbikes roared past, riders hoisting flags from their handlebars. Street vendors set aside their wares, joining in the cadence. Even the midday sun seemed to pause in its arc, as if to witness the collective exhalation of decades of frustration. Each cheer carried the weight of history, yet rang with the fresh clarity of revolt, transforming ordinary bystanders into willing participants in an unfolding spectacle of power and purpose. Above the tumult, a tapestry of color and symbolism danced in the bright sky. Burkinabè tricolors, deep red, gleaming gold, and forest green, fluttered beside Russian flags emblazoned with golden stars, their poles crossing like swords at a royal procession. Gigantic posters of Captain Ibrahim Traoré loomed overhead, his stern visage cast in dramatic chiaroscuro, eyes scanning the crowd as if daring anyone to doubt his authority. Beneath each colossal banner, placards bore slogans scrawled in bold letters. Full support for President Ibrahim Traoré and the people of Burkina Faso. Long live sovereignty, our destiny in our hands. The slogans coalesced into a visual chorus of unity, each cardboard sign a voice in the larger choir. Dust kicked up by the shifting mass created swirling golden halos around marchers' heads, making each figure glow with an almost sacred aura. Here and there, a cluster of young women in vibrant pagnies swayed in unison, their skirts tracing arcs of solidarity, while hardened veterans of past rallies, some missing limbs, others scarred by conflict, stood shoulder to shoulder with toddlers, perched on parents' shoulders, eyes wide as they tried to grasp the enormity of what was unfolding. In the midst of this living tapestry, individual stories emerged like sparks in the night. Salif, a 21-year-old university student, gripped a hand-painted placard so tightly that his knuckles whitened. On it, the words, "Imperialism is dead," curled around a crudely drawn map of Africa breaking free from chains. Sweat beaded on his brow, but his gaze never wavered as he leaned forward, chanting with a conviction that belied his years. Nearby, Awa, a former schoolteacher and prominent civil society leader gray before her time, raised a trembling megaphone to her lips. Her voice quavered at first, soft as a whisper against the collective roar, but gained iron strength as she proclaimed, "Let our unity stand as a shield against foreign meddling." Each syllable carried the weight of personal sacrifice. Her younger brother arrested in the wake of the junta's intelligence sweep, her own livelihood uprooted by curfews and checkpoints. Yet there she stood, unbowed, radiating resilience. Between them wandered little Isa, no more than 7, brandishing a crudely carved wooden sword and giggling as he taunted invisible enemies. His laughter threaded between the adult chants, a reminder that even in moments of historic upheaval, innocence could still find purchase. Other figures, too, an elderly farmer in patched sandals, a group of nurses in scrubs, a handful of foreign, journalists scribbling notes, added their unique textures to the unfolding tableau, each person a brushstroke contributing to the grand canvas of protest. Then came the moment that sliced through the orchestrated flow like a shard of glass. A small voice, not part of the anthem, rose above the roar. "Papa?" A little boy, perched on his mother's hip, pointed directly at the figure in the faded cap moving quietly through the mass. Heads snapped toward him. Camera phones swiveled. The chant fractured into a startled gasp. For a heartbeat, time stalled. The boy's wide eyes met the concealed face of the man he recognized, his own father's commander, the country's leader hidden in plain sight. The child's cry hovered between revelation and confusion, and thousands of feet halted their stamping. Traoré felt the blood rush to his cheeks as if the sun itself had turned to scorch him. Would the crowd's fervor shift to alarm? Would this unscripted outcry unravel the careful illusion of unity he'd cultivated? In that instant, Mother's arm tightened around her son, pulling him back into the current of people, and the chant, fragile and disrupted, reclaimed its place. "Long live our sovereignty!" The voices nodded back together, stronger perhaps, because of the interruption. And just like that, the moment passed. The veil of anonymity held intact, if only barely. Beyond the stunned silence, the elevated platform waited, microphones poised for the next act. Speeches that would bind the crowd's raw energy into a narrative of defiance and destiny. Captain Ibrahim Traoré steps up to the raised dais, the afternoon sun glinting off his dark uniform as the square falls into a hushed expectancy. He unfolds a crisp white page and looks out over the sea of faces. Farmers in woven tunics, students in graphic tees, civil society elders standing shoulder to shoulder, each pair of eyes reflecting the same question. What comes next? Clearing. His throat, Traoré lifts the microphone and begins in measured tones that nevertheless carry the weight of a man who has held power for 19 months. "Today," he intones, his voice amplified above the crowd, "we stand united against forces that have long dictated our fate from beyond our borders." A ripple of agreement surges through the plaza, and he continues, each phrase punctuated by the staccato beat of marching feet. "We stand united," he repeats, voice rising, "not as subjects of foreign masters, but as architects of our own destiny. We stand united in defense of our people, in defense of our land, and in defense of our future." The words hang in the air, carried aloft on a breeze that seems to pause in reverence. He shifts slightly, gazing toward the horizon where ECOWAS headquarters once loomed like a symbol of regional control. "No longer will we bow to the old order," he declares, fists clenched at his sides. "No longer will we tolerate the whisperings of neo-colonial influence or the idle promises of distant capitals. We are here, we are strong, and we will not waver." At the emotional peak, Traoré's tone softens, as if confiding in each listener personally. "My fellow Burkinabè," he says, eyes glinting with hard-won conviction, "we have sacrificed much to reach this day. Brothers and you, sisters, mothers and fathers, we have walked through fire together, in the deserts, in the cities, in the hearts of our homes. And now, from that crucible, we emerge forged and unbreakable. I promise you this, we will build a free, dignified, sovereign Africa, one that no storm can shake, no chain can bind." A chorus of cheers erupts, but for a heartbeat the square is silent, the crowd hanging on that final promise as though it were a lifeline thrown into uncertain waters. From the edge of the stage, Prime Minister Rimtalba Jean-Emmanuel Ouagadougou steps forward, his demeanor composed, and his parchment neatly folded under one arm. His voice, in contrast to Traoré's soaring declarations, is calm and deliberate. "Citizens of Burkina Faso," he begins, each syllable measured, "our decision to exit the economic community of West African states was not taken lightly." He pauses, letting the implication of that departure settle like a stone tossed into still waters. "We chose sovereignty over subordination," he continues. "We chose autonomy over ambivalence." Behind him, a discreet LED screen flickers, to life displaying a stylized graphic of the ECOWAS star, now fading, and the nascent flag of the Alliance of Sahel States rising in its place. Ouagadougou's speech weaves policy with poignancy. "We understand the sacrifices this path demands. Markets will shift, borders must be renegotiated, yet we forge ahead hand in hand with our neighbors in Mali and Niger to establish a mutual defense pact, to share resources, intelligence, and hope." As he speaks, the screen morphs into a map tracing overland routes from Bamako to Niamey to Ouagadougou, dotted lines illustrating shared grain stores and coordinated patrols. "This alliance of Sahel states," he says, voice firm, "is not merely a coalition of convenience. It is a fellowship of free peoples, bound by our shared history and common aspiration, to create a bulwark against external meddling and internal strife." He folds his hands, gaze sweeping the crowd. Together, we ensure that no foreign power sows dissension among us, that no outside interest can fracture our unity. We are our own guardians now. A respectful murmur ripples through the spectators, the measured cadence of his words providing a stark but welcome counterpoint to the fiery promises of the president. Moments later, the microphone is handed to Mariama Sanogo, a veteran civil society leader whose reputation for grassroots activism precedes her. Her silvered hair is pulled back, and her voice, at first soft, grows in conviction as she steps into the spotlight. This day belongs to the people, she declares, lifting a calloused hand that has known both hardship and hope, not to generals, not to parliament halls, but to mothers who have cried behind closed doors, to children who have watched their fathers disappear in the night, to farmers who till the earth beneath skies they could not own until now. She paces slowly, each footstep a drumbeat beneath her words. This is a people's victory, a triumph of unity over division, of common purpose over private ambition. Mariama's final line, delivered like a raised banner, resonates across the square. Our unity is our shield. A hush follows, as though a collective exhale, before the plaza erupts into applause that echoes off colonial-era facades and modern high-rises alike. For a fleeting moment, the fractured histories of foreign interference and domestic dissent coalesce into a single refrain of empowerment. Behind the scenes, digital screens and drone cameras capture each speech, ready to splice together a rapid-fire montage for evening news across the Sahel and sympathetic outlets in Moscow. The map graphic that accompanied Ouagadougou's address transitions into a broader geostrategic illustration. Thick golden lines mark the flow of new arms shipments from Russian depots to training camps in the Sahel. Thin red lines represent the retracted corridors of French military bases now shuttered or vacated. Animated arrows trace the flow of grain and resources between Nouakchott, Bamako, Niamey, and Ouagadougou, symbolizing the life cycle of an alliance founded in necessity and nurtured by shared defiance. Traoré watches these visuals as they play out behind him, each frame reinforcing the narrative he has crafted. That Burkina Faso's future lies not in the old partnerships of yesteryear, but in the emboldened bonds of newly kindled friendships. He allows himself a brief nod, an admission that the strategy he unveiled months ago is now taking tangible form before an audience of tens of thousands. Yet in his mind flickers faster scenes of looming challenges. Restless jihadist insurgencies carving paths through borderlands, economic sanctions that might tighten like noose around collective throats, and the ever-present risk that internal fractures could crack the alliance's foundation. As the final applause subsides and the last speakers descend from the podium, a lone bugler steps forward to sound the charge, its clear notes resonating above the crowd like a declaration of forward motion. For Traoré and his inner circle, the rally has been a clarion call, a living proof of support and an overture to the next phase of their governance. Yet for the millions watching via live stream, from Ouagadougou's dusty streets to diaspora, communities in Washington and Paris, the spectacle raises urgent questions. Will this newfound unity endure under the strain of real-world tests? Can Burkina Faso and its Sahelian allies maintain solidarity in the face of economic hardship and guerrilla warfare? In the fading sunlight, as the crowd begins to disperse, the words of each speech linger like embers in the evening air. The promise of a free, dignified, sovereign Africa burns bright in the minds of hopeful citizens, even as shadows lengthen across the plaza, reminding all that every flame casts darkness at its edges. And so, as the anthem of solidarity drifts skyward, another rallying cry for a people's revolution, the stage is set for what comes next, deeper into uncharted territory, where alliances forged in defiance will be tested by the crucible of reality. The chiaroscuro of triumph and trial awaits in the chapters still unwritten. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the final notes of the rally's anthem faded into the warm Sahelian dusk, the memory of Traoré's covert arrival lingered, like a secret shared between old friends. We saw him step from an unmarked vehicle into a throng of fervent supporters, his heart pounding in time with the distant drums. We watched him navigate the sea of placards, "Down with imperialism," and "Our destiny in our hands," as if each banner were a living pulse of national will. We felt the electric shock of that breath-stealing moment, when a child's cry nearly unmasked him, when hundreds of eyes locked onto a lone figure in a faded cap, only to be swept back into a roar of unified devotion. Then came the speeches, the promise of unity echoing in every syllable of "We stand united," the vision of a free, dignified, sovereign Africa, shimmering in Traoré's steadfast gaze, and the calm resolve of Prime Minister Ouagadougou as he charted the exit from ECOWAS and the birth of the Alliance of Sahel States. Voices of civil society leaders rose like a chorus. Our unity is our shield, reminding us that this moment belonged not only to generals and presidents, but to mothers, teachers, students, and elders who have borne the weight of history on their shoulders. Through these scenes, the themes of loyalty, betrayal, hope, and defiance intertwined, forging an emotional landscape that bridged private fears and public triumphs. Yet beyond the spectacle lies a deeper calculus. Burkina Faso has cast off the old chains of neo-colonial influence, stepping into the uncertain light of self-determination at considerable cost. Forging closer ties with Russia, disentangling from France, exiting ECOWAS, and founding a new regional bloc, these decisions were neither easy nor without consequence. The promise of sovereignty comes with economic risks, shifting trade routes, looming sanctions, and the persistent threat of insurgencies that have tested the resolve of every Sahelian government. As the dust settles on today's display of solidarity, we must ask, will this alliance hold under real-world pressure? Can the shared banner of anti-imperialism withstand the centrifugal forces of resource scarcity, internal dissent, and external agitation? Only time will tell whether the bonds forged in defiance will mature into enduring structures of cooperation or fracture under the weight of complexity. If you felt the thrill of today's journey, from the hush of an undercover leader moving among his people to the thunderous affirmation of collective purpose, then stay with us. Subscribe now and share your thoughts. What fate do you foresee for Burkina Faso and its Sahelian partners? Will this bold pivot signal a new dawn for the region, or will it mark the prelude to fresh challenges? Drop a comment below with your predictions, and don't miss our next episode, where we'll go behind the scenes of the Alliance of Sahel States, exploring its inner workings, ambitions, and the realpolitik that will determine whether a free, dignified, sovereign Africa becomes a lasting reality.